I'm very, very engaged with the subject of parents. I think of the many different groups of people that got lost and got demonized and were treated very badly in the last few years when gender ideology has swept around the world. In many ways, I think the parents, they had a particularly cruel experience, because what happened, it was like their family were invaded in many ways at their lowest point. So when your child is distressed, in deep distress, so much distress that you bring them to the professional. So it is really like you're very, very worried about your child. And I remember one parent, and I'll never forget it, saying that, I felt like I was in a horror film because, my child was so distressed. I brought the child to the mental health professional, which was a psychologist. And the psychologist immediately kind of overran my concerns, dismissed them, and spoke about my child in, the opposite sex immediately, and started talking about the menu of different medical interventions this young, very distressed child should have. Now, the child already had about 5 diagnoses of different things like autism, ADHD, and she said, I felt like I was in the horror movie. And when the monster actually turns out to be the nice person. So the doctor was this nice guy, and she felt like he'd just ripped his mask off and he was the monster come to get her child. And it was such an evocative image of exactly how vulnerable the parents have been in this, because they go hoping for, a good solution to wherever the mental health practitioners, not just the mental health, but the medical body, the healers. And I think they have been really, really ripped up. Families have been ripped apart by this, and it's not said. And when we write the history of what went on in these, maybe it's a decade, maybe it's 5 years, or maybe it's going to be a decade anyway, a long time, this era, there will be a chapter on what happened to the families, what happened to the parents. They will get a chapter. And I think right now they're gathering strength. I was delighted to be part of the GDSN, and I'm going to open it to everybody else now in a second, and I'll talk about that. But I'm so pleased that the parents have found their voice. I'm so pleased that Pitt, who are here today, parents of Inconvenient Truths About Trans, they've got their book. It's going to be published in August. And they have found their voice, and they're kicking back that actually they love their kids, and all their biggest sin is concern. That was all they had.
So if I can describe my experience as a mental health professional who had worked with gender issues throughout his career, the father of a trans-identified child. Too loud?
No.
Oh, we're good. To go into the medical community and to be treated with contempt, and to be told that these professionals knew my child better than I did. I mean, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it's also like stepping back from it, it's just such a perversion of what has always been the case, that the authority of the parent was respected, and that reality and society at large stood there to back up the authority of the parent. And now that's been completely undermined. There's a hatred of authority and an undermining of the parents as the real authorities on their children. And we've handed it over to the children and the world at large to say what's true. That seems to me like, I don't know, I'm not a historian or a cultural historian, but it seems to me like it's never really been that way before. Like, it seems to me it's something very new, that the parental authority is no longer respected.
Yeah.
Joe and I both are coming to this. There's some feedback.
There's some sort of feedback.
Yeah, there's a hum. I thought it was my chair.
Too many microphones?
Joe and I come to this setting with sort of similar experiences, and also similar, we've been putting similar types of energies, I guess, and collectively pulling people together and starting to see patterns in not everything that we've experienced being negated, being completely left out of the narrative, left out of the history taking, left out of the collateral information. We're seeing this in our groups. So you run a group too, right? I thought you did run a group, sorry.
Nope.
So I guess really the reason that I'm here more so is because for the last 2 years, 1.5, 2 years, we've been running, the GDSN's been running a lot of we've had to break up into smaller groups because there's been so many, and also because there's been different categorizing of the situations that parents are in. So some parents, as you can imagine, a parent of a 14-year-old who's maybe that parent's been able to keep their child off the train and out of the system for a little while, but they're getting more and more pressure. They may not want to sit and listen to a parent of a 22-year-old who's they've lost touch with and who's already harmed themselves in various ways and gone through surgery and maybe has alienated themselves, because that's a very common theme. So one of the really common themes that we're seeing is first that the medical system is facilitating the estrangement and the separation of the parent and child, which is insidious. It's just insidious. And that's a common theme. I have very rarely had a parent join us. Now, that's not to say, okay, well, we can always say we're not speaking for the parents who aren't having these experiences. And I can tell you, I have physician colleagues who are affirming their children and would tell you that they don't know about these situations. They're not going to hear about them. No one's advertising it. I mean, unless you're in that echo chamber, which we're not, I don't think we are, but their echo chamber is different and it's a little bit protected. It's much more protected, in fact, than ours is. So anyway, my point is we're seeing different themes now, and this theme of the alienation or the separation of the child and the parent, it starts when that first person, who's often a medical person, comes between and starts the wedging between the parent and the child. And I think this is one of the many things that when we're working in the groups, we're trying to figure out how can we win back some of that right to parent our children.
Yeah, I think I want to give a little bit more background of the GDSN. Myself and Laurie are involved with the reason we started. I've said it before, so I won't belabor the point, but effectively, COVID had happened and there was this kind of downturn in my life, as in I was much less busy, and we had the opportunity to start a parent support group. And the very first parent support group was definitive in deepening my understanding of the great miscarriage of justice that was happening to parents, and realizing this is a medical scandal that's unfolding, and it's ripping up decent, loving parents and families, ripping their lives apart, and they're silent. They literally have been silenced on every level. These are often very much anonymous accounts. We don't know who they are. They're very quiet, because when your child's life is in the midst of a free fall of self-destruction, you don't go out. You don't go out to the media. You don't speak out. So you're kind of necessarily gagged. And at that vulnerable time, you realize that you're part of something huge. So what we realized when we did the first meeting, as I've often said, I'll never forget it, went down to Henry afterwards going, I can't believe what I've just sat through. It was so shocking just to hear account after account after account, all saying my vulnerable, quirky, awkward, lonely, distressed kid has got caught into something here, and I can't get them back. They've lost themselves and they're incredibly miserable. And so then we formed the Gender Dysphoria Support Network, the GDSN. And one meeting within a week had turned into 2 meetings, 3 meetings. We did lots of different meetings. And then, like Laurie said, we had to start categorizing the meetings. So then we did meetings of boys, parents of boys, and then meetings of parents of girls. Then we did meetings of parents of young teenagers, and then meetings of parents. We had to categorize it some way, so we thought we'd start, dividing it a little bit. And parents of over 17 and over and 17 and under, because 17 was probably the most stressful time. It felt like, as one parent said, it felt like the soldiers were coming. You know what I mean? Because at 18, everything was going to change. And the child might pull out, because we heard of many, many, many stories of children pulling out, but some of the kids weren't going to pull out, and massive tension around should they go to college and expand their mind, which you'd love them to do, but they'd also have access to medicalisation and a kind of an ideology that is swept through the colleges. And so then we had parents of estranged kids and, parents of children who had medicalised. So we really had to categorise it lots. Then we brought back, by the way, just for those who'd be interested, we decided it probably wasn't so healthy to always have silos. So we brought them back together again, thinking like, this is getting a bit too divided, because the parents of boys weren't talking to the parents of girls. Not that there was any hostility, but we realised that maybe we'd fallen into hyper division, which I would argue this movement is very into. So I tried to merge them back in, and it was totally resisted. But yeah, I've since then, as a result of the GDSN being so busy and so devastating, I realised something much more political had to happen. So I kind of pulled away and formed Genspect. And the parents was always the idea that this would be parent facilitated, very like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is, let's say that's ran by, alcoholics. And Al-Anon is by the family of alcoholics, because as sick as the alcoholic is, the person who loves the alcoholic gets obsessed with the alcoholic's sickness, if you follow me. It's the very same. As deep into gender the child is, the parent falls as deep into their obsession about their obsession. It's a really definite kind of path. And so we thought we have to just give some support to that and let it be parent facilitated. And it is, it's completely parent facilitated now. And it's going very well, but it's the sooner that we have a need to close it, the better. And the way the world is looking, I'm not sure we will.
I just want to add one thing on to what you just said about Alcoholics Anonymous and mutual support groups. The key difference, and I think we're all aware of this, I'm just going to say it anyway, is that when you attend Alcoholics Anonymous, and we also have Al-Anon, which is the families of people with alcoholism. When you attend Al-Anon or Alcoholics Anonymous, you can probably bet there are people out there in your life, your family members, your spouse, your children, your parents, who want you to be there and would support you being there. This is so, and at least it starts out very covert. When people are joining this group, they're like this. They're sitting in their cars. It's in the dark. They are in their bathrooms. I know we've heard some of this before, but on podcasts I've heard them, and I'm like, yes, exactly. And it's covert, and no one is supporting them. They're in a little box all by themselves, and they'll come on. Can I use the right pronoun here? Because we're so used to Zoom meetings where they've got to put certain pronouns about your pronouns, and so it's different in that we have to acknowledge and get used to the fact that this person is in a little silo, in a little hole by themselves, and that they don't have the kind of support that someone coming for care or for support in any other realm would have. Cancer survival, whatever it happens to be. Those are all perfect examples of where we're used to that. This is so novel. I don't really know when I can think of when there's ever been anything like this before.
I think it's totally new. And I just want to say that what it does for these parents is it puts them in this completely untenable position where these are your choices. If you're terrified of losing contact with your child, since we all are, your choice is you can lie to them. I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to lie and pretend to believe in some sort of ideology that you don't support, or you can insist upon the truth, and everybody else in the world will tell your child, your parents are transphobic and you need to get rid of them. These are the choices. And I consult with a lot of parents as well as seeing children, and you have to help them lean into their authority, and I think that's essential for them to embrace being the parental authority. And at the same time, it's such a risky thing to do because you don't have society at large backing your authority. So sometimes, frankly, I feel hopeless, and I feel like what really has to change is the outside world before we're going to be able to get through this.
Yeah, I think more than anything, what's needed is an acknowledgement that there's an aspect of anti-family, that kind of anti-family ideology that is underpinning a huge amount of the ideology, and I think that's very important, that we need to highlight it, and we need to make sure that we start to realise actually the family, it's a concept that has endured for thousands, millennia, whatever, and it's a good structure. We're going to open it up to questions. So will we start with Sue Evans? I need to do a little bit of text.
Yeah.
On? Marcus and I are competing for the gold stars at the end of the day, so you can cast your votes. No, I think one of the difficult things to say, but I'm going to say it because it's been around a bit. People have alluded to it, but I think one of the things in connection with what you're saying, Joe, about, and in fact all three of you have said about the attack on the family and the authority, is that the children involved, the young people involved, are in deep distress. They are struggling with something, and they are, really the people we've got to be empathetic with and understand and so on. But the other thing that's really got to be tackled, I think, in terms of this area is that they are also very aggrieved, very controlling of their parents. They are dominating families. And one of the things that I really notice with the parents that I see, and one of the things we talk about, is helping them reestablish, and I know it's not easy, so I'm not saying these are pat answers, but helping them get back in the seat of more ordinary family life and asking their children to kind of go along with the behaviours and the expectations of, ordinary family life, what parents ask their kids to do, because there is a way in which they dominate the parents, but they also control the family life, and the other kids in the family are getting left out. So I'm not coming up with any answers, but I do think it's something that's hard to talk about because, of course, we are also there for our patients, the kids. The parents are there for their kids, absolutely. But it's an important part of the equation, and it's something you get so sort of worried about your kid and so lost in it that sometimes you also lose an expectation of how an ordinary family might behave and the roles within that. Does that make sense? Sorry. Yeah.
It does make sense, and it feels like it's part of this child-led parenting phenomenon where the children are leading the way and they're tyrannizing over the family, and they're telling their parents how they need to grow up and what will happen. And it feels like everything's just been reversed and turned upside down. And it also makes me think of what you were saying, Marcus, about the idea that we want to get rid of patients' pain. We want to get rid of our children's pain instead of helping them to learn how to endure their pain and grow through the horror of adolescence. We don't need to cure it. We don't need to save them from it.
I was just going to take advantage of the
one
fact
more
that
question.
Sue got to
Marcus.
compare. Yeah, the Evanses. I just was going to say that I'm always trying to put together the sort of social forces, particularly the attack on the family that you've mentioned, Stella, and you, Joe, the suspicion of authority, and with what Sue said, that the kids are struggling and rebelling. That's a normal part of development, and they've got their grievances. But as you say, when you've got this sort of mixture between the kids sort of driving for independence and then it's affirmed externally, that adds to the sort of assault on the parental authority. The other problem is we're always striving for our sort of ideals, and when we're told we're bad parents in some ways, we become guilty, and then I was just thinking about you, Laurie's talking about the parents sort of hiding away in the car, like terribly ashamed. And of course, it's the last thing that the kid needs in some sort of way, to sort of act as if they've done something terribly wrong, they're a failure in some sort of way, rather than, yeah, well, we're all not ideal in the way we'd like to be, but we've got to tolerate our imperfections.
I want to say one thing more to that, though, that we should be aware of, and I don't know how common it is in which countries, but for example, in Ontario, Canada right now, there is a case where a couple is about to lose custody of their 15-year-old. So because they're not affirming her and allowing for medical treatment. And so this fear isn't really just, oh, well, my child's controlling the family dynamic, but in fact, I have true fear that society's going to, Orwellian, come and get me or get my child.
Can I add to that? And we really will take a question from Stephanie, and then we will move on, because we've got a great talk coming up with Julia Mason. But I want to add to that. You know, Iseult White yesterday talked about the chilling effect. And, you know, I would be running these groups, and there's people from all different countries in the world. And let's say in Ireland, there is no chance of that happening, of social.
It's happened several times.
I know, but what has happened is a chilling effect of parents all around the world thinking that if they stand up. So Marcus might say, actually, you can stand your ground. You live in England or you live in Ireland, wherever you are, you have authority. And because of the chilling effect, the parents think they have no authority and they think they need to collapse into it. So it's very important people realize your geographical region really matters in this context, whether you're a therapist or a parent. We have one more question from Steph.
Alan.
No, Alan.
Ellen.
Okay, sorry.
Richard.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Stephanie, we'll get you later.
You got a microphone?
Sarah, give it back.
Hi, my name is Ellen Richards. I'm here as a parent of a young man who's been through this, and a little over a year ago was absolutely devastated and looking for support. And I found Laurie's support group in GDSN, and I'm incredibly grateful. I also want to say that it's very safe in those groups. It's very intense, hearing other people's stories and weeping as you listen, and it's a little hard for me to talk about this in front of a big group instead of in a small, safe support group. But I wanted to make a couple of points about things that I have heard from parents and about my own story. In our family's case, my son came to us with saying that he was transgender. It was over a decade ago, and I often have wished that Genspect wasn't around, GDSN wasn't around. I'm a high school teacher, and I didn't know any. I knew one child who had been trans-identified from a young age, but other than that, there wasn't a contagion yet. Like, I see it now. I see it in my high school now. And so one thing I want to point out is that for some parents, we believed the doctors. So it wasn't so much us fighting. I mean, we may have been a little bit, this is strange, I wasn't expecting this, but we were told that this is what was good for our children. And so that's just one point I want to make. Because I think sometimes if you affirmed your child, or if you believe the doctors at first, there's almost a kind of blame to that, like, why didn't you stand up? And I was trying to take care of my child. The other thing that I'd like to say is that I've been working with Joe for a year or so, because my son is a detransitioner now, or what I would call, I loved what Richie said the other night about being in recovery. And so I've been working with Joe to try to form a support group for parents of detransitioners. And I've met a couple of people here. So we're working on that. For me, the most devastating thing was when my son came and said that it was all a terrible mistake. And I just want to point out that we had the panel the other night, and there are quite a number of detransitioners at this conference. I have the good fortune to be staying in a house with a number of them. And sometimes people say to me, oh, you're lucky, because your son is detransitioning. And I think maybe after hearing the panel of the young people in recovery the other night, nobody's lucky here. The lucky people are the ones that never got drawn into it. When your child has experienced medicalization, and I won't go further than that, but then how the grief and what the parent feels is nothing compared to what the child feels. And I wouldn't even try to represent my son's story. This is mine, but that's why I needed help at that point was, oh my God, what have we done?
Oh my God.
What have we allowed to happen? And for a year, well, I'll just say my grief was immense. And thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
I definitely think that is the last word on that because it described the situation so eloquently. Thank you.